Well, hello there again. So, what I'm going to do now is take you on my journey over the last 6 years researching, and unlike most people, almost all of my research has been done through books, and the vast majority has just been going to my local library in Accrington, randomly discovering a book and reading it. So that is really where pretty much all this information comes from. I want to make that really clear from the start. So this is not the result of internet searches. This is a result of information which can be obtained in a really old-fashioned, orthodox way. So off we go. So really it all began with this one. And this is a guy who was the United Nations representative in Sudan. And he writes about what was going on in Darfur. And I'll be honest with you, I've been so out of touch with the mainstream media, I didn't really know anything about this. And so he explains what life is like as a child in Darfur. So an example as follows. It all begins for him when this woman comes to give evidence to him, and he's in his UN compound and she's outside, and she's not allowed in. The guards or whatever don't let her in, and she's there 24 hours later, and eventually lets her in, and she says, I want to tell you what's going on in my country. And she tells him, and he's so shocked, and he goes off and does investigations of himself, travels around, and he comes across what is a completely institutionalized practice at that point. So what happens is this organisation called the Janjaweed, a militia, they go out on a regular basis and they just arrive in the village and they create an instant reign of terror, shoot a few people, round up the men and the boys and round up the women and the girls. And the men and the boys are all forced to watch, and the women and girls are all raped. And that is just how it is. That's what's going on in that part of the world. So to be a child in that part of the world, that's the kind of thing that could happen. So I'm going to introduce you to this book, and this is written by two people. So Chris Thomas, I know very well. He's a healer. He's been practicing for more than 35 years, and his particular book is about power. It's the power to control the money supply, to control governments, to control multinational business, the power to control the media, and above all, the power to prevent the identity of those in power from becoming known. That in itself was a major eye-opening book for me. And I'm going to introduce you to this young woman. So she was born in North Korea, and she lived a life that was pretty inconceivable, in as much as we are now talking about a country where all the basic moral constraints are out of the window, and she experiences bodies arriving in the street. People are just killed and they're left in the street to decompose, because any sense of organisation that some of us might know is broken down to one. That's just how it is. So she wrote this book, and she's actually been on YouTube and testified in huge conferences, which means her story's been exposed worldwide. And it talks about her childhood, what it was like being a child in North Korea, and how eventually she created the inner strength and resources to actually move out of her country and to take the incredible risks and to flee to China with help. And it describes how she had to sell her body in order to survive what then happened to her. And she had an extraordinary journey and did actually end up, after an incredible journey, in South Korea, where she then had the very first experience of a safe life. And then this is another one. This is one about children we talk about girls, and we're talking about Afghanistan. And what the girls in Afghanistan very quickly realise is that in the culture they're growing up in, the only real freedom to be found is to change gender. And so this is what they do. They take on a new persona. They are obviously incredibly careful about what they wear. It's a culture where the body is pretty much covered, so it makes it a lot easier for them to manage. And they're fine up until puberty hits big time, and then they have the horrific problem of, do they carry on having the relative freedom to be a boy, or go back into what for them was the life that they were desperate to escape from, being constrained as a girl. I learned a huge amount from reading that book about what it can be like to be a girl in certain parts of the planet. And then this one. So there are so many books on this subject, because this is what I was referring to in the previous film about the fact that a lot of children are used to entertain adults, and this is what I'm talking about. So we have all the obvious examples. We've got Jimmy Savile, who procured children, and a primary source was children's homes. However, this book is not about that. This is about a girl who is brought up in a family where there is definitely a degree of neglect, and there's a lot of poverty. And mum and dad actually don't know how to cope with what happens to her when she becomes a teen. And she finds herself being groomed, which is a particular thing. What happens here is young adults, in this particular case from a different race, targeted her amongst others and became friendly with her and other girls, and then invited them to their place, offered them food at first, then very strong alcohol. Drugs can also be offered in certain situations. This wasn't, it was just pure food and alcohol. So what is created there, and this is a very interesting thing to understand, is this sense of indebtedness, this sense of obligation, which was actually inculcated over a period of months, and then all of a sudden the tables are turned, and actually this child's existence is now purely to entertain adults. So we're talking about rape, and that's the best way to keep it clear so we know what we're talking about. So we have sex. Now, for human beings, sex can be one of the most pleasurable and delightful experiences, and it's a necessity in order to create new human beings. So children get created by this process. Well, that's one aspect. The other aspect is where it's used for cruelty, for harm, for hurt, and to understand that a lot of adult humans really enjoy that. That's very entertaining for them. So there are many examples. There's Telford. If you just say to people in the know Telford or Rochdale, then you become aware that this sort of thing is incredibly common. So children can be procured from children's homes and orphanages, or they can actually be literally extracted out of their own homes, and they go down this incredibly steep slide. And there's a particular point, and I need you to understand this, because some children get paid for providing these services and others don't. So this is an example of one that didn't. And it isn't just sex, it's also being beaten with an iron bar. It's whatever entertainment the adult wants. That's the kind of thing that goes on there. So we have reference here to refugee camps. So that's a picture which is appropriate to give you a slight flavour of what it's like. So imagine that you're a child and you're living there. You got taken there because you couldn't live where you were before because of war, and it's a completely contained place. There's no way to get out. Once you get in, that's it. And you can't work, you can't educate yourself, you just are literally survival. That's all that matters. Are you able to survive another day? And there's approximately 2 billion human beings that are affected by that, so a significant number of children affected in that way. And then there's this one. So when we were looking at the other sexual cases, that's where there was a group that were deliberately rounding up, procuring children for the use. This is a different one altogether. This is a case, again, it's a child, it's a girl, and she is obtained by one man who operates completely on his own, and she is imprisoned, enslaved, pretty much starved, not given any dignity whatsoever, no ability to clean herself whatsoever, and just used as entertainment via rape and unspeakable cruelties, which went on for 10 years. And this is not hidden away in the middle of nowhere. This is in a city. This is actually in a city in America, surrounded by other people living their lives. And the only way she was able to get out is one day the guy left the door open. By that point, she's not just one sex slave. There's about 3 living there. This guy's managed to obtain and control. But he makes a mistake. He's actually falling to pieces because of the impact of what he's been doing for those years, those 10 years. And she manages to just wave the arm out of the front door, and someone comes along, and then the whole thing's finished, broken out. So that's another one. And then of course we have this inevitable example of what's been going on. Don't need to say any more about that really. This one is interesting as much as the UK was spending £1 million for advertising to try to persuade people to come forward. And in the most recent case we had just a few days ago, where vast amounts of money was spent to actually deal with child abuse and paedophile rings and organised crime in this sense, and the whole thing was thrown out. So that also is part of the story I want you to know about. And before we talk about that one, I'm going to sit on this one for a bit. No, I'm not. No, I will go forward. Yeah, we'll do it this way. Right. So this is a guy who worked for the United Nations. He's actually a Canadian general in the Canadian Army, goes over to Rwanda and finds himself in the situation of having to supervise a genocide with virtually no soldiers, in as much as they can't really do anything about what's going on. All they can do is to observe, pretty much, which causes him acute trauma, which takes him years to get over, and he then ends up being directed to go to a different country in Africa, and he learns all about child soldiers and what goes on there. So this is where I got the information from before, but let's just go into the child soldier. So this is what happens. This is a common practice in many parts of the world. So a vehicle arrives, and there are 1 or 2 adults, but mostly children, and they've all got guns, and they jump out of the vehicle and they just start shooting, and they create a reign of terror in that village, and they are targeting the school or whatever area most of the children are to be found, and they kill the adults, take the children, put them in the back of the truck, take them away, and they then undergo a process. They are processed, and this takes a while, and they get exposed to all the things we might expect, such as beating, starvation, rape, all the things to kind of break the person's sense of who they are, really to destroy their identity. And I want to just draw your attention to a couple of practices. One of the main things they make use of here is a combination of cocaine and gunpowder. That's right, the stuff in bullets. So they get the stuff out of bullets, mix it with cocaine, and these children snort this substance, and this gives them the ability to go out on the killing sprees, which they are then ordered to go out on. And it seems that there are many countries, what they like to do is when they have a civil war going on, they will first of all send the children out, because then when the regular soldiers on the other side discover that there are children running at them, this tends to cause them to become very disturbed. They don't quite know what to do about it for the crucial number of seconds that they might actually lose that campaign. So that's done. Doing that, taking something as obviously toxic as that, gives them the ability to slip into the altered state of consciousness to become the monstrous killers that they do become. And then if they're incredibly fortunate, they don't get killed in battle, and they don't get killed by all the other things that could happen to them, and they don't get killed by what they've been given, the cocaine and the gunpowder. If they actually survive all that, then that might probably take years, and then they are unable to go back to the part of the world that they lived in before, because they are completely rejected by the adults in that culture and other children, because they've done such horrific things that there's no way they can be integrated back into society. So that really is quite a thing to get your head around about what it's like to be a child on planet Earth at this time. So I'm just going to do that and do that, because I do need to speak about Joseph Kony. Joseph Kony is operated out of 3 countries. Uganda, Tanzania, and I think it might be Sudan, not quite certain about that. But what this guy's done, he's been acting with complete impunity. In other words, everyone knows he does it, and no one does anything to stop him. So he's a religious fanatic, and he's got these 3 countries, and they all turn a blind eye to what he does, and he just goes and procures child soldiers from whatever place he wants, and does exactly what he wants, just like I've been talking about. So that goes on. These are all things that go on with children. And then there's that. So there's this bloke writes a book called A New Earth. So I'm not really into the writer, but it's the title that interests me, A New Earth. So we've got all these things going on. And I've never felt that I could ever share this information with any of you before, because if that was to have been the end of my films, then I would have been a doom and gloom merchant, and I've got an allergy to being a doom and gloom merchant. So that is not where this story ends by any manner of means. So what I want to do now is I want to show you this image. So this is an image of the colour violet, which you've probably noticed is what I was wearing in the film beforehand. And this colour has a very powerful effect, which is why I was wearing that jumper for you to watch the film I was talking about with the difficult material. So this is what I'm ending with this particular shot here. So this is all to do with a being, and this being actually lived far longer than a normal human lifespan. You can actually look him up. That's his name. He's called Saint Germain. So he lived for much, much, much longer than a normal human lifespan. And I believe he's let go of his physical body now and is engaged in other things, because he is a being that comes to me if I'm working with a client and they've experienced horrific abuse. He always comes in and he brings that colour. Let me just go back. It's that colour, that violet. So this is the transformation that Saint Germain offers. All of the negativity of the past is being transmuted by the violet flame that burns brightly around me and inside me. I feel inspired. So I'm delighted to report that there are changes going on in the world, and it's only over the last few days I've become aware of some on the bigger picture, and there are examples which are increasing, whereby the people that have been perpetrating these vile acts are being targeted. Let's call them what they are. They're all criminals, aren't they? The people that have done all these things, they're criminals. That's what they are. So these criminals are being targeted. They are being located. They are being arrested. And some of them are choosing to end their own life before this can happen. There's a case only this week of a famous actor that is so ashamed of the abuses he's committed in his life that he left a note to explain what he'd done, and he tried to jump off a bridge. A couple of young teenagers tried to pull him off the bridge, but then he got hit by a car and died. So we're living in a very interesting time at the moment, and that's as far as I can go with that slide. So I'm actually going to talk to you about one country in the world, because it's helpful just to see. So bearing in mind all the information I've given you so far comes from reading books from the mainstream, not from delving deeply. But there's something that came across through the mainstream social media a few years ago, and that's Iceland. And it shows you a picture of a policeman in Iceland and saying what it's like to be a policeman in that society, because basically they arrested all the bankers, the people that were ruining their society, the criminals. They went and arrested the criminals, including the bankers. Maybe I should say that one more time, including the bankers, and tried them and sentenced them to long jail terms, and now the people have a really amazing life. So what happened in Iceland some years ago, well, that model is being rolled out into the bigger picture, and we will find out more about this in due course. So let me remind you that for people who've been through abusive experiences, Saint Germain is a very powerful energy from outside of the earth, and it is all of the negativity of the past is being transmuted by the violet flame that burns brightly around me and within me. I feel inspired. So there are beings beyond the earth plane that are very much involved in helping us in our journeys, and there are also flesh and blood people in positions of authority able to take action, and this is actually happening. So the Great Awakening is not so far away now, and there are events that will be happening this year that we're all going to become aware of increasingly. And watch the news, but be aware to have the ability to filter out the fake news from what's really going on. So when I say watch the news, I suggest you look at Twitter, and I suggest you look at 8chan, and I suggest you look at any source which you regard to be reputable, and always have a sense of healthy skepticism. See what feels right to you. We're living in very exciting times. The days of the criminals ruling, their days are numbered, and the numbers dropping fast, very fast indeed. So thank you for being with me on this journey. Much love to you.